Well, thank you for being here this afternoon for my initial comments on the findings from the Integrity Commissioner's first investigation that we've requested into the behavior of the Minister of Housing, Mr. Clark. We've seen in the last while, one damning report after another. This government's behavior is rapidly eroding Ontarians' trust in their government, in the integrity of their government, and the accountability of their government. That the Integrity Commissioner found Mr. Clark contravened the Members' Integrity Act is shameful, but I would say not all that surprising, even with what is a very high threshold for a violation. Because right from the beginning, we all knew, and I think Ontarians knew, that something didn't smell right. And we are now getting some answers. And that's why I filed my request with the Integrity Commissioner that he investigate the minister's actions back in December. The commissioner interviewed 61 witnesses. He reviewed emails, maps, documents, text messages, and briefing decks. That's a lot to dig into, and I want to thank the Integrity Commissioner and his office for the work that they've done. But we know that Minister Clark contravened now the conflict of interest and part of the insider information sections of the Members' Integrity Act. So we need to call it what it is: corruption. It's been clear to us that Mr. Clark needs to resign. We've been calling for that for 3 weeks since the Auditor General's report was released. Now it's time that the Premier needs to do his job and kick him out of cabinet. Enough is enough. Recall the legislature immediately so we can restore the lands to the Greenbelt, fire the minister, and give the people of this province an opportunity to truly hear from the Premier, hear the questions that the opposition can ask, and shine some light on what's taken place here. So I will say I think that we are at a place as well. I've never seen anything like this, a 200-page report. It's very clear that this, I would say, merits investigation by the RCMP. But again, the buck stops at the top. We've seen the minister refuse to resign. We've called it what it is. We saw a really damning report from the Auditor General. We need to see the Premier now take the step of removing his minister. And I'm happy to take any questions.
So the report was pretty damning, obviously, but it did say that the minister essentially didn't know what was going on, even though that's an aggravating factor, like it not in his favor. Do you believe that, or do you think that? Do you still think that maybe he knew some more than he was letting on?
Well, was it? I guess you could say that at best, what we see here is gross incompetence, and that the minister was clearly unable to do his job. Which, by the way, this was all coming directly from the Premier and the Premier's office in terms of the mandate letter, right? But at worst, it's corruption and it's colluding with developers. And it was always and continues to always be about ensuring that a very small number of developers profited immensely from these decisions. So, I think there's still a question of what the government is not releasing, what information they're not sharing with Ontarians. I think there's a lot more here and to come. And I would remind you as well that there's still an outstanding request on my part for the investigation to extend to the Premier and the Premier's actions.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, is it corruption, though, if the minister didn't know what was going on?
I think if it's willfully, choosing to turn away from what you know is happening here, right? I mean, look at the speed, at the haste with which this all took place, the deception I think that, you know, it again, I mean, I've always said from the beginning of this that if it wasn't just like outright, you know, knowledge of what was happening, it was deep incompetence. But I think that there's another side to this, which the integrity commissioner gets at, which is that if you're turning a blind eye to it, is that because, you know, you don't really want to be, you know, you want plausible deniability, which is actually a term that the Auditor General also used in her report.
Marit, what does it say to you that the Premier has so far stood by Steve Clark and expressed his confidence in him and kept him in this role?
It says to me that the Premier does not care that his government is losing the trust of Ontarians, and doesn't believe that his government should be held to a higher standard of accountability or integrity. It's, I think, really shameful. You know, I think that I can't remember another time when we've seen a government or a Premier dig in like this. It says to me that the Premier is more concerned about these developers losing out on this deal than he is about the trust of Ontarians. And what we've seen over the last few weeks is one of the greatest breaches of trust in the history of the province of Ontario, I think. Yeah, of the Ontario government.
Do you think if Minister Clark resigns or is removed from his role and the government plows ahead with this plan to develop the Greenbelt as they presented it, do you think that solves their problems?
I think it's deeply unacceptable. I mean, that's the other piece of this, is there's no way you can read this report and think that this was conducted in a proper way. Obviously not. The process was not fair. It was corrupt. There was collusion. It was deceptive. It was hasty. I mean, I can think of many, many ways to describe this process. Nothing supports this continuation of this plan. They need to reverse course. I mean, I haven't shied away from saying that my interest in this, at the end of the day, is to return the land from the Greenbelt, from these developers to the Greenbelt. I want them to reverse course. But I do not see how this government can stand by this decision now. There's no way. They need to reverse course immediately. Nothing that they have done will have the trust of Ontarians, that any of this was in their interest, because it has never been about housing. It was not about housing, and to this date, it is not about housing.
Bart, as you said, it's been damning report after damning report, and yet after the other report, the Premier stood by the Minister, and the Minister has stood by the decisions, saying, okay, maybe a few mistakes were made. What makes you think the Premier will change course now?
Well, I mean, we can hope, right? We can hope that the Premier will see the error in his ways, that he will step up and be a leader, you know, a real leader. Will try to build back trust in government. And the only way to do that is to take these actions. But I'm going to take it a step further. I want to see the Premier stop messing around now and share his mandate letters with the people of this province. We've seen 2 reports now. The Integrity Commissioner, the Auditor General reference specific sections of the mandate letter that was given to the Housing Minister. The government is fighting in court to prevent the mandate letters that went to all of their ministers from being released to the public. My goodness, what are they trying to hide? How bad could it be? What are they trying to hide? The Premier needs to make available the details of what the cell phone conversations are he's been having on his private phone. You know, what happened to the emails that were deleted by staff that were detailed in the Auditor General's report? There's a lot that still remains hidden from the public, from the people of this province. Why is the Premier hiding that? Why is he holding on and refusing to ask for his minister's resignation?
On the mandate letters, what do you make of those snippets that we're learning from these 2 investigations? What do they tell you?
They tell me that despite the Premier's many statements, even as recently as June 2022 in the last provincial election, when he said they would not be selling off the Greenbelt, they had every intention of doing it. I mean, they turned around and they drafted mandate letters that included absolutely that intention. And that just didn't happen overnight. They even in this report talk about how they had, in the Integrity Commissioner's report, he talks about how they had been, always seen this as one of the possible tools. So it tells me that they lied over and over and over to the people of this province during the election, before the election, in the 2018 election. They had every intention of selling off the Greenbelt. And it also tells me that the Premier and his office are very much part of this decision. So I think, again, that's why the Premier has to answer for this. And there have to be consequences. And the very trust and integrity of our democracy and our government are at stake here. And I say that, and I've been traveling around the province all summer. I've been to riding after riding after riding, whether you're in cities or small towns or on farms in rural Ontario, in northern Ontario. Everybody is talking about this. Everyone is talking about it. They want the decision reversed, and they want the government. They don't trust the government anymore. It's very significant, and the Premier can try all he wants to downplay it, but Ontarians are smarter than that. Yeah.
The Commissioner is calling for the Housing Minister to be reprimanded for his failure in this case. Mm-hmm. What consequences do you hope, what do you hope the Premier will face in this whole decision as well?
Well, I mean, this is one of the problems with, frankly, the Members' Integrity Act, and the rules here in Ontario are not strong enough. So the Integrity Commissioner can only recommend reprimand. And, this is a point we've made. I've even brought forward motions to try to toughen up the legislation, because I think MPPs should be held to a higher standard than what we are currently, frankly. You would hope that we swear oaths and that we stick by them, but clearly not everybody does that. And so we need stronger tools. And so, we'll see what happens next, and how the legislature also determines what happens next. But I would hope, again, to me, the reprimand is just a piece of it. The Premier is the one who has the power to demand the resignation of to kick his minister out of cabinet. The Premier has the power to make those mandate letters public. The Premier has the power to recall the legislature. Right now, today. He's done it for all kinds of reasons. I would think this is one of is a significant reason to recall the legislature and reverse course. A fine or taking away some responsibility of the minister. I don't know. To me, that's the problem we have, right? Is we don't really have a lot of tools in the province of Ontario to ensure, I think, appropriate consequences for what the nature of what's happened here.
Doesn't this happen in every organization that makes rules for themselves? We see it with police tribunals. We see it with all sorts of things. If you're allowed to make the rules and the punishments, you'll always go easy on yourself, and millions must be wasted with Integrity Commission work, and I think they've worked very hard. But if it has no teeth, what's the point?
Well, that is a really good point, right? The legislation and the tools the Integrity Commissioner has are limited, and they're limited by legislatures, by the government, and government after government have whittled away at these things. They haven't made them stronger, right? So we've pushed, for example, I've asked that the appearance of conflict of interest should be one of the measures that we're held to, right? And that's something that exists at the federal level. The government here and the Ontario government voted that down. They don't want to have that. So, I think that's unfortunate, because I do think that, and I've talked about this a lot, but I think that that's one of the reasons that Ontarians aren't voting. I think it's the reason that people have lost a lot of confidence in their government. No kidding. Because, we are elected to serve them, and we should be held to a higher standard. And that's something that I think Ontarians are seeing for themselves. What happens when a government is allowed to hide behind, freedom of information rules, to decide that they're going to hide their mandate letters. This is what happens. And the Premier can keep hiding, but the truth will come out. It will come out. one day it will come out. I can assure you. Yeah.
This is a smaller part of the report, but on Luca Bucci,
Yes.
he seems to say that it was a bit of a misunderstanding and didn't breach anything. Do you accept those findings?
I'm still digging into the report and thinking about the implications of that. We had included the investigation, and we'd asked the Integrity Commissioner to also look separately, I think, at Mr. Bucci and his conduct. Obviously, so I need to take a closer look at that piece, but I still have concerns. Yeah, having gone through it quickly.
The other thing that came out today was the Information and Privacy Commissioner response to you. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I'm pleased that the Information and Privacy Commissioner. No, I did. That she is taking everything into consideration. I'm hoping I get a chance to actually debrief with her to understand a little bit about what's taking place now, but that she is considering some of the requests for review. I remain really concerned that we've already seen emails that we know, according to the Auditor General, were deleted. We know the Premier continues to maintain that that even if he conducted government business on personal devices, that's personal devices. This is unacceptable, and so we're going to continue to use every tool we have in the toolbox. Including, as I've already mentioned, I've asked the Cabinet Secretary as well to make sure nothing goes amiss, because there are rules.
So from that response to you, if I'm reading it correctly, does it mean that she is still going to be looking at those issues just because they'd already been raised other ways, not through your letter? Is that?
Yeah, well, I mean, my letter was, yes, I think she says that she's continuing to look at these things based on these other requests. I think my point in writing to her was to simply say, these are issues that have come up over the last few weeks. As the leader of the official opposition, I have deep concerns that when I hear about emails being deleted, that the Premier isn't using his government device, which means he's doing government business on personal devices, which means he thinks he can hide it from the people of this province. And I want to make sure that she's aware of those things. And I wanted to assert with her that I think that these issues need to be addressed. So I didn't quite read it that way, but I take your point, yeah.
We're going to go to the phones now.
Oh, okay.
We will take callers on the line now. Thank you.
Helen Hale at Queen's Park today. Please go ahead.
Hi there. I was just wondering what you make of the finding that from the complaints about the two specific sales that happened before the Greenbelt announcement. The commissioner says that the evidence doesn't bear out that being a case of insider information, but it did find that, I guess, Ryan Amato's enthusiasm for getting more information about the properties that developers were proposing to him did amount to a revealing of insider information that was, I guess, picked up by the oversensitive network or the ever-sensitive network of developers as like a change of position in the government's policy. Do you find, is that a disappointing finding for you, or what do you make of that?
This is just the first, first taste, perhaps I would say, of what we may find in further investigations when maybe the RCMP or others dig a bit deeper into that. But I would say that, the idea that the word went out, that Ontario was literally open to business for a few developers who had an opportunity to make a lot of money, $8.3 billion, is not insignificant. It's dirty, right? It's dirty dealings. And I would think that it's enough of the basis to consider, again, deeper investigation to that. And I who else knew? We still don't really know what happened in some of the meetings that took place or at the dinners. There's still a whole other side of this that we're expecting the Integrity Commissioner to investigate it related to the Premier. But no, I think it is again, it is collusion and corruption. I don't see how it can be looked at any other way, that some people were given a heads up that this was coming. And that's the other piece. Like, let's not forget that just weeks before, the people of this province had been told, Greenbelt not going to be carved up, safe, no problem, don't worry about it. So that's not insignificant. This is a sign that people should start to get ready to come in with their plans and their proposals. And then, as we know, based on the Auditor General's report as well, that they were literally served up to the government, the Conservatives. Here's the plans, here's what we want, and they knew exactly how much they were going to make off of that. And they were connected to the Conservative Party.
The report also mentions the actions of lobbyists in all of this, and there's one lobbyist who is identified as Mr. X, who apparently claimed to have taken Amato to a Raptors game, although Amato denies that was the case. What do you make of things like that in this report?
I mean, there's so many. I know we've all heard the rumors, and we've also seen the other, stories in the past of Mr. Ford being taken out to games in Florida by some of the developers. Lobbyists, developers. This is why we need tough rules around these things. But any rule is only going to be as strong as the ability to enforce it, and we need to make sure that we toughen up these rules. But once you start read that, and once you start talking about Mr. X, this is not the Ontario that Ontarians want to live in. It's not, we don't want a province that's controlled by Mr. X, right? We want a province where people have a right and can expect that their government is going to make the decisions that benefit them. Not a couple of developers who are going to make billions off of these land swaps at the expense of our food security, at the expense of important ecosystems, at the expense of where the government's actual focus should be, which is on actually building truly affordable housing.
Thank you. Next question from Ahmed Al-Bayoumi from Poly Corner. Please go ahead.
Hey, Marit. Thank you for taking my question. I'm just parsing through this report. The Integrity Commissioner says that there was a meeting on October 21st, 2022, and type notes taken by a ministry official indicate that the Premier directly gave 3 files to Mr. Amato with regards to a specific, land or location or areas. Amato, the Premier's office denied this. I'm wondering what you make of it, though.
Well, it's deeply disturbing. And I think, again, as long as the Premier and his government refuse, and his office refuse to share things like the detailed notes from some of these meetings, the emails and the cell phone records and such, Ontarians are not going to be satisfied, right? Because this just raises more questions. This raises questions, again, about the Premier's direct involvement and his office's direct involvement. I mean, let's not forget, the Premier's office has a Director of Housing Policy. It defies belief that they were not involved in direct ways in the conversations about how this land was going to be divvied up. So I think, but again, that's, what we have here is a Premier who is continuing to hide behind is continuing to hide important information and records. And until we get to the bottom of that, I think Ontarians are going to continue to have questions about the extent of his direct involvement in this, and including, of course, let's not forget the fact that some of the developers who then benefited directly from these land swaps sat at the premier's table at a private family function. This is the